The moment that fixed itself like a shard of glass in my memory came between the clink of crystal and the hush of a room trained to admire its own perfection. My son leaned in so close I could smell the rosemary on his breath and whispered, "Mom, are you enjoying my $10,000 payments?" The sweetness of the candied yams turned to ash on my tongue. I stared at him, and I saw not a man but a boy, waiting for approval. He thought he'd already earned. "Son," I said, my voice steadying against the bone-white china. I live in a 161-square-foot apartment. The word apartment felt smaller than the space itself. Somewhere to my right, porcelain split like ice on a river, and my daughter-in-law lost all the color in her beautiful, lying face. Thanksgiving, for me, has always smelled like roasted turkey and hope. That morning, in my tiny studio above Murphy's Deli, I set out my secondhand plates as if I were dressing a stage, each nick a veteran of better years. I smoothed a navy dress I'd worn to church for 5 years and breathed onto the cracked mirror, fogging my 64-year-old reflection until the lines softened into a woman I still recognized. The toilet stood 3 feet from my bed. The window faced a brick wall, and the whole life I had packed into that one room felt oddly lighter when I decided to accept Randall's invitation. He hadn't asked me to dinner in over 3 years, a small miracle. I told myself as I left at 4:30 p.m., became a nervous passenger beside me in my beat-up Honda Civic. By 6 p.m., the sky over Oakwood Hills was a clean, expensive blue, the kind of color you buy with landscaping crews and security gates. My little car shuddered up their circular drive as if it knew it didn't belong. Avalon opened the door in a cream cashmere sweater, the kind you don't fold so much as cradle. "Agatha," she said, and the warmth never made it into her eyes. The house smelled like designer candles pretending to be pine forests, every room a hymn to beige and restraint. I walked past vases that probably cost a month of my Social Security and felt my throat tighten, the way it does when you see water, but you're not allowed to drink. Then there was Randall, handsome at the head of the table, carving a turkey that looked like a magazine cover finally set free. "Mom," he said, hugging me. And for a breath, I inhaled everything I'd missed: summers of baseball and scraped knees, winters of cocoa and broken hearts I had bandaged with borrowed wisdom. We took our places. I asked about the investment firm because that's what you ask when the conversation must behave itself. Avalon spoke about yoga retreats and a spa weekend, as if wellness were a trophy you could carry from room to room. The food was perfect silken potatoes, green beans elegant enough to attend the opera, and with each bite I felt a treachery I couldn't name yet, like eating bread with stolen butter. Halfway through the meal, the room leaned closer. Randall set down his carving knife and dipped his head toward mine. "Mom, are you enjoying my $10,000 payments?" he whispered. And the table turned into a stage where I didn't know my lines. My fork clattered. The chandelier hummed like a hive. "What are you talking about?" I asked, and my voice came back to me older than I remembered. "I live in a 161-square-foot apartment, smaller than a one-car garage." His face emptied of certainty, the way a tide pulls back and leaves everything raw. "I've been sending you $10,000 every month for 2 years, he said, eyes skittering toward Avalon. "Avalon handles the transfers." That was when the plate shattered. It fell in bright, clean pieces across the white tablecloth, gravy pooling like a slow confession. Avalon crouched, gathering shards with trembling fingers. "I'm so clumsy," she laughed, but the sound had too much metal in it. Randall's gaze returned to me, wide and wounded. "Mom, where have you been living?" I swallowed a desert and said, "Above Murphy's Deli, 3 feet from my bed to the toilet. I can touch both walls if I stretch." The silence that followed was a courtroom without a judge. Avalon kept her head down, her wedding ring scraping porcelain as if it wanted out. I watched my son's understanding move through him, turning over every year he thought I was ungrateful. Every holiday he waited for a thank you that never came. Every phone call she said I ignored. The room seemed to contract around the truth. A house built on perfect lies groaning under the weight of a single honest sentence. The rest of dinner passed like a badly rehearsed play where no one dared call for a cut. Avalon dabbed at the ruined tablecloth and insisted, with a smile that kept flashing and failing, that the bank must have mixed something up. Randall's jaw tensed as he asked quiet questions that landed like stones in still water, each ripple exposing more of the bottom. When I finally left at 8:15 p.m., the air outside felt colder than the marble floors inside, my old Civic coughing awake beneath the perfect stars. I drove back through the polished streets of Oakwood Hills as though returning a glass slipper I was never meant to wear, the steering wheel slick under my palms, the word 10 echoing in my head like a drumbeat. $10,000 every month for 2 years until the echo turned into silence. Sleep would not touch me. At 2 a.m., I lay on my narrow bed, hearing the pipes rattle and the deli fridge hum below me, counting the ways I had stretched $90 grocery runs into 2 weeks of meals. The afternoons I'd split tiny white pills in half to make the blood pressure medication last. When dawn slid like soft linen through the blinds, I sat at my little table with instant coffee and watched the brick wall brighten from soot to rust to ordinary. At 9 a.m., the phone rang. "Mom," Randall said, voice gravel soft and up all night. "I'm so sorry. I don't understand any of it, but I'm going to the bank this morning. I'll call you after." I told him I was fine, and we both let the lie pass like a stranger in the hallway. The hours between 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. moved like a slow elevator in an old building. I straightened the 2 plates in my cabinet, wiped the tiny sink, folded and refolded the same dish towel until it looked ironed by intention. When the phone finally rang, I gripped it like a handrail. "Mom," he said, and anger braided his voice. "You need to sit down." I was already seated, knees touching the table leg because there was nowhere for them not to touch. "The transfers have been going into a joint account Avalon opened," he said. "She's been withdrawing the money like clockwork. Last month alone, there's a $3,000 purchase at Nordstrom, $1,500 at a downtown spa, and $2,000 marked as home improvements." I pressed my free hand to my forehead, the room dipping as if the floor had briefly lost interest in holding me. "She used money meant for my rent on skin cream and steam rooms." He exhaled hard, a sound I remembered from the first time he fell off his bike and pretended he hadn't cried. "Mom, I thought you were cared for. I thought you didn't like making a fuss. When you didn't thank me, I assumed you were keeping your pride. I thought you didn't need me anymore," I said, and the sentence felt like opening a window too quickly. By 4 p.m., the bank's printed record was a parade of someone else's life dinners I'd never eat, vacations I'd never take, designer things that would never fit in a 161-square-foot world. Randall's anger deepened into something colder. She said email forwarding. He said that evening at 7:10 p.m., calling again, voice clipped with disbelief. "I found messages I sent you that were redirected to an account she controls. She had the post office forward your mail to a P.O. box." "Mom, remember your birthday 3 months ago? I sent a card with $500 cash. You never said anything. I thought you forgot," I whispered. And the room tilted again, this time with a smaller, sharper grief. "I ordered you a tablet for Christmas last year," he added, softer, "and a grocery gift card. The delivery shows, signed by Avalon. I closed my eyes and pictured the box arriving at a door I would never open, my name on the label like a joke without a punchline. Something cold and clean settled inside me then, the way winter air clarifies a horizon. Avalon hadn't just skimmed money, she had built a wall out of lies and taught us to admire the view. "What are you going to do?" I asked. He was quiet long enough for me to hear his breathing slow into resolve. "I'm going to confront her," he said. "Tonight." A tremor ran through me that wasn't fear so much as recognition. The night was finally about to tell the truth. I set the phone down and looked around my little room at the bed 3 feet from the toilet, at the cracked mirror, at the secondhand table, feeling the smallness of it transform in a single breath, from evidence of neglect into proof that I had survived. I didn't hear from Randall until late the next morning. The clock above my stove read 10:30 a.m. when the phone finally rang, and his voice came through hoarse, scraped raw by the night before. "Mom," he said. She admitted it. Not all of it she's spinning stories about banking errors and secret savings accounts, but she couldn't explain where the money went. "It's gone." I gripped the receiver, my thumb tracing the chipped edge of the plastic. "What will you do?" I asked. "I've already moved what's left into a new account she can't touch," he said, his tone low and deliberate. "And I've called a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce." The words dropped like stones into a still pond. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I thought I was taking care of you. I thought—" His voice broke. "She made me believe you didn't want help." I swallowed hard. "She made me believe you didn't care," I said. And in that moment, the two halves of our isolation finally touched, fitting together into something whole. That afternoon, sunlight slanted through my narrow window, painting gold bars across the brick wall outside. For the first time in years, I didn't feel ashamed of the space I lived in. I felt awake. The betrayal still pulsed under my skin, but beneath it was something sharper, cleaner purpose. When Avalon called 3 days later, her voice sugar slick as always, I was ready. "Agatha," she said brightly, "I feel just terrible about the confusion. I think there's been a banking mix-up and I want to fix it. Maybe we could meet for lunch tomorrow where I asked, my voice even." "Leonard Dan, downtown," she replied quickly, my treat. I could hear the smile she was trying to wear like perfume. "Of course," I said. "What time? Noon?" She answered. "Perfect," I said, and hung up. The next day, I borrowed Mrs. Chen's old sedan and drove into a world that didn't belong to me, the kind where doormen nodded and women's heels clicked like punctuation on marble floors. Leonard Dan glittered behind glass doors and chandeliers that looked too fragile to breathe near. I walked in wearing my best church dress and a coat I'd patched myself, holding my head high. Avalon waved from a corner table, radiant in a designer dress I now knew had been bought with my stolen comfort. "You look wonderful," she lied, air kissing my cheek. "I ordered us some Chardonnay from Napa Valley. The glass cost more than my week's groceries." I took a polite sip and waited. Her performance began almost immediately. "You have to believe me," she said, eyes wide and damp. "I was only trying to help. Randall was worried about you, and I thought if I managed things properly, I could make sure the money would be there when you really needed it." I nodded, silent. "There were just some mix-ups," she went on, touching her throat. "Banking can be so confusing, especially for us women. I wanted to laugh 40 years I'd balanced ledgers and stretched paychecks like silk, but I kept my expression gentle. Of course," I murmured. "That was thoughtful of you." She relaxed, believing she was winning. "You see," she continued, "I was saving it. High-yield accounts, good interest. I wanted to surprise you both." "How kind," I said softly. "And where is this account?" Her eyes flickered for the first time, and a faint crack appeared in the marble of her composure. Over the next hour, her lies multiplied like Vine's bank errors, delayed transfers, imaginary receipts. She reached for my sympathy and found only glass. I watched every nervous gesture, every too quick breath. By the time our plates were cleared, I knew more than I needed. This was not panic, but habit. Not guilt, but skill. Avalon lied the way most people breathe. When she rose to hug me goodbye, her perfume was sweet enough to sting. "We'll sort it all out soon," she promised. "Of course," I said, smiling as I watched her glide away, certain she still held the script, but I had already begun to rewrite it. That night, I called Randall. "Son," I asked quietly, "how often did Avalon tell you I was happy and comfortable?" He sighed. "All the time. She said you loved your apartment, that you were taking art classes, that you didn't want to be bothered." I let that sink in. The perfection of her illusion. "Did you ever try to visit I didn't know where you lived?" He admitted. "She said you wanted privacy." I closed my eyes, the pieces fitting together with cruel precision. "She didn't just steal money," I whispered. "She stole us." In the weeks that followed, I turned my little apartment into a war room, not the noisy kind, but the quiet, deliberate one where every movement mattered. I bought a small notebook and began to write everything down: dates, calls, lies. The way Avalon's voice trembled only when she thought she might lose control. I gathered screenshots from her social media, each luxury handbag and well-deserved spa day tagged with the same smug smile. She wasn't just stealing money, she was building a kingdom out of it. I read somewhere that the most dangerous predators were the ones who smiled while they fed. That's what she was doing, feeding on our trust, our silence. Then, 2 weeks before Christmas, she called again. Her voice was syrupy, trembling just enough to sound sincere. "Agatha," she said, "I know things have been awkward, but family should be together for the holidays. We're hosting our annual Christmas party. I'd love for you to come. I also have wonderful news about that savings account I mentioned." I smiled at the phone, even though she couldn't see me. "That sounds lovely." "Dear," I said. "Should I bring anything, just yourself?" she replied quickly. "And maybe, don't mention our lunch conversation to anyone. You know how people gossip." I agreed, softly. But inside, I was already deciding which mask to wear. The night of the party. Oakwood Hills looked like a Christmas card bought on credit. Their house glowed with thousands of white lights, the kind that said, "Look at us. We're perfect." I arrived a little after 7 p.m., wearing the same navy dress from Thanksgiving, but with a new red scarf from the dollar store. It wasn't much, but it made me feel like armor. Avalon met me at the door in a scarlet cocktail dress that shimmered like guilt in motion. "Agatha," she exclaimed, hugging me tight. "You look lovely." Her tone was all sugar, but her pulse beat fast beneath her skin. She paraded me through the rooms, introducing me to her friends as the strong, independent mother-in-law who refuses help. Every word was a blade dressed as a compliment. I smiled through it all, watching her bask in her own performance. People nodded, impressed by the story she'd built. How noble of me. They must have thought, to live simply and never ask for more. I was their holiday inspiration, a cautionary tale wrapped in pearls. I waited until the music softened, until the party had settled into the pleasant rhythm of comfort. And then Avalon drew me aside. Her eyes glimmered like frost, her champagne hand steady again. "I've been working with the bank," she said softly. "Good news, I managed to recover about $30,000. There were some penalties and fees, but the rest is safe." She smiled as if expecting gratitude. "That's wonderful," I said. I was getting worried about my emergency fund. Her expression faltered. "Your what, my emergency fund?" I said cheerfully. "I've been saving for years about $15,000. I keep it in the same bank. I thought maybe you could help me consolidate everything." Her color drained like wine spilling across linen. I didn't realize you had another account." "Oh, yes," I continued, feigning absent-mindedness, "though the bank's been calling lately. Something about suspicious withdrawals. They said it might be fraud. They even mentioned an investigator." Her hand trembled, the champagne sloshing dangerously close to the rim. "Agatha, you don't need to call anyone," she said quickly, voice tightening. "These things always sort themselves out. Probably just a system error." "That's what I thought," I said pleasantly, watching her mask fracture. "But the woman from the bank said they can trace every transaction right down to the computer used." She froze, smile faltering. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," she whispered. "No rush," I said lightly. "They told me to gather all the evidence first, every statement, every receipt. You know how thorough these fraud cases can be." Her jaw clenched, eyes darting around the room. "Agatha," she hissed, "you don't want to get the bank involved. They could freeze your accounts." "Well," I replied sweetly, "if everything is in order, there's nothing to worry about." That's when she realized she was cornered. The predator had finally met prey that bit back. She excused herself to freshen up, disappearing down the hall with trembling hands. I helped myself to another glass of champagne and smiled as I watched the party sparkle around me. Randall approached, concern in his eyes. "Mom, you seem different tonight," he said, more confident. I looked at him, really looked, at the man he'd become honest, hurt, but still my son. "Maybe it's just the Christmas spirit," I said with a small smile. But in truth, it wasn't that. It was something far older and sharper. It was justice, quietly setting its table. Avalon's calls began the next morning, her voice shrinking with each one. At first, she tried to sound calm, rational. "Agatha, I think we should handle this privately," she said. "The bank thing, it's just causing unnecessary worry. Randall doesn't need to know about it." I could almost hear the panic she was trying to smother. "He deserves to know everything," I replied softly, stirring sugar into my coffee, especially when it concerns his mother. She hesitated. "He's been under a lot of pressure lately. Let's not add to it." By the fourth call, the sugar in her voice had dissolved completely. "Please," she whispered, "just don't say anything until I fix it." "Of course," I said sweetly. "I wouldn't dream of interrupting your process." Each day, I felt her control slipping further away. I could picture her pacing that pristine kitchen, manicured fingers digging into her phone, terrified that the quiet woman she'd underestimated might actually be holding the match. And she was right. Then came New Year's Eve. Randall called at 5 p.m., his voice warm and unsuspecting. "Mom, why don't you come over tonight, just the three of us, something simple? Avalon's making her famous beef Wellington." I smiled at the irony. "I'd love that," I said, setting down the phone. This time, I wasn't walking into her world as a guest. I was walking in as the truth she couldn't bury. I arrived just before 7 p.m., carrying a bottle of cheap champagne I'd bought with loose change. Avalon greeted me at the door. Her smile stretched tight. She hugged me too long, her hands cold. "You look wonderful," she said, pouring me a glass of wine before I could take off my coat. Randall was cheerful, oblivious to the storm curling around us. The table was set for 3, silver and crystal glittering under soft light. As we ate, I listened to Randall talk about his new goals: saving more, managing money better, being responsible. "It's amazing how money can just disappear if you're not paying attention," he said, cutting into his Wellington. The sound of the knife against the plate was sharp and deliberate. Avalon's fork slipped from her hand. "That sounds very wise," I said, smiling. "I've been doing the same, reviewing my accounts carefully, especially since I've been having those issues with the bank." Randall frowned. What issues? Avalon froze, eyes darting to me like a trapped bird. I took a slow sip of wine. "Oh, it's probably nothing," I said lightly. "They've been looking into some strange activity, large transfers that don't match my usual spending." Randall set his fork down. "Mom, what do you mean?" I reached into my purse and pulled out my small notebook, the one that had become my secret weapon. "According to their records," I said, flipping it open, "the suspicious withdrawals align perfectly with the payments you've been sending me. It looks like someone redirected the funds." I looked up, meeting Avalon's eyes. "They said whoever did it was very clever, but they always find the digital footprints." The room went still. Randall's gaze shifted from me to his wife. "Avalon," he said quietly, "is there something you want to tell me?" She started to cry before she even spoke. "It's not what you think," she sobbed, mascara trembling down her cheeks. "I was just trying to help. Your mother doesn't understand money. She would have wasted it." Randall's voice sharpened. "Wasted it on what? Rent medicine?" The tears came faster. "You don't understand the pressure I was under," she said. "Maintaining this house, your reputation. Your mother was fine living simply. She was eating canned soup for dinner," he shouted, standing so fast his chair hit the floor, "while you spent thousands on spas and handbags." "I was going to pay it back," she cried. "I was investing it." "You stole it," he roared. "For 2 years. I thought I was taking care of her. You made me believe she was ungrateful. You made me feel guilty for not visiting more. All that time, you were pocketing my love and calling it management." She turned to me then, desperate. "Agatha, tell him about the savings account." I set my notebook down carefully. "There is no savings account," I said. My voice was calm, but every word landed like a hammer. "You stole $48,000 from me. You intercepted letters, gifts, emails. You built a wall between me and my son so you could live like a queen on my poverty." Randall sank into his chair, head in his hands. "I trusted you," he said softly, "and you were supposed to take care of her." Avalon sobbed harder, but there was no sympathy left in the room for her tears. "I want you out," he said finally, his tone flat and cold. "Tonight. Take what you can carry, but remember, everything else was paid for with stolen money." Avalon ran upstairs, her heels clattering like an alarm bell. I sat across from my son in silence, the weight of truth settling between us. After a moment, he looked up, eyes red. "How did you know?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "She thought being old and poor meant being blind," I said. "But when you've survived on $900 a month, you learn to notice everything." That night, I drove home under a sky clean and dark as slate. The streetlights blurred through my tears, but they weren't from sadness. They were from release. The truth was finally out, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. 6 months later, I woke to sunlight spilling across a kitchen that finally had space to breathe. Real walls, real doors, a 1-bedroom apartment with windows that faced a small garden instead of a brick wall. I made coffee in a machine that didn't eat quarters, listening to birds instead of traffic. The air smelled like possibility. Avalon's name still appeared sometimes in the news or in the stack of court papers on my counter, but mostly, it was gone like a bad dream that had finally released its hold. The civil case had moved faster than anyone expected. Randall's lawyer, a sharp woman named Rebecca Martinez, took the mountain of evidence we'd collected and turned it into an avalanche. Credit card records, intercepted emails, returned packages, all of it. Every dinner she'd charged, every vacation she'd justified, every lie that had cost me another night of hunger. Avalon's lawyer had begged for settlement, but there was nowhere left to hide. She signed over jewelry, her car, the contents of her personal accounts, $42,000 returned to the woman she'd called a useless old bat in an email to her sister. I read that message sitting in Rebecca's office, the words burning through me. The old woman is too proud to complain and too stupid to notice. I remember setting the paper down and laughing, not bitterly, but with the wild, clean laughter of someone who had already won. With the restitution, I bought new furniture, nothing extravagant, just comfortable things that belonged entirely to me. A pale blue armchair by the window, a dining table where I could finally fit 4 plates instead of 2, and a soft rug that felt like forgiveness under my feet. Randall came every Sunday now, bringing groceries and coffee, sitting on my balcony as the sun melted into the city skyline. He'd apologize sometimes, his voice quiet. "I should have known," he said once. "I should have checked." I reached over, squeezed his hand, and said, "You trusted her." That's not a crime. What she did with that trust is, we talked for hours about work, about the future, about how silence had been her greatest weapon. Every conversation rebuilt something she had tried to destroy. The divorce finalized on a rainy Tuesday in April. Avalon left town that same week, her world reduced to a few suitcases and regret she still didn't recognize as her own. But a month later, I got the call that would close the circle. "Mrs. Sullivan," the woman said. "This is Detective Martinez with the Economic Crimes Unit. We've reviewed your complaint for financial elder abuse. We'd like to proceed with criminal charges." I hesitated only a moment before saying, "Yes, please do." I wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. I was thinking about all the other elderly women who might never speak up, the ones who still believed silence was safer. The trial lasted through the summer. Avalon sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, her hands folded neatly like she was still at a charity luncheon. She cried when she spoke, but her words were all about herself, the humiliation, the loss, the way people misunderstood her intentions. Not once did she look at me. Not once did she say my name. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a statement, I stood, my knees steady. "Your Honor," I said, "the defendant didn't just steal my money. She stole 2 years of my life, 2 years of love between a mother and her son. She took my dignity and tried to make me believe I was invisible. But she was wrong. I may be 65 years old, and I may live on Social Security, but I am not weak, and I am not silent." The courtroom was still when I sat down. Even Avalon stopped crying for a moment. The judge sentenced her to 18 months in prison and 3 years probation. It wasn't long enough for what she'd done, but it was enough to make the world see her for what she truly was. That evening, Randall took me to dinner at Lernar Dan, of all places, the same restaurant where Avalon once lied to my face. This time, the chandeliers didn't feel intimidating. They felt like stars we'd earned. Randall raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he said. I lifted mine, smiling. "To family," I replied. "The real kind." As we clinked glasses, I thought of the woman I'd been that Thanksgiving, trembling in a borrowed dress, apologizing for taking up space. She was gone now, replaced by someone who'd learned that patience can be a weapon and truth can be its own kind of justice. I had been underestimated, silenced, dismissed, and yet I had endured. So, if you've listened this far, thank you. Tell me, what would you have done in my place? Have you ever trusted someone who betrayed you? Leave me a comment below. I want to know how far this story reaches And maybe, how many voices like mine have been waiting to speak? If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that remind us we're never as powerless as others want us to believe.